do not raise your voice. You disappear, and that, more than violence, more than blame, is what haunts her. Not the storm, but the absence of weather. Not the scream, but the hallway where sound should be. You leave the room like a priest leaves the altar, as if communion was too sacred to fight for. You watch her unravel like stained glass falling in slow motion. But you say nothing, and she fears this more than cruelty, because at least cruelty confesses belief. But your silence, your beautiful, unbearable silence, says she is not even worth your contradiction. You don't hit, you don't curse, you only fold your spirit behind your ribs, as if even God had no right to disturb you. And she begins to think, maybe the stillness inside you is not peace, but judgment. And maybe your silence is not fear, but punishment. And maybe love, to you, was always something less than need. If this whisper already lives beneath your ribs, let it breathe. Like the video, leave your silence in the comments, subscribe, and do not run when the mirror speaks. You stand beside her, yet you are no longer there. She watches your hands fold like chapel doors, polished and hollow, as if each finger clasps around a vow already buried. You nod at the right moments. You answer with your eyes. You listen without listening. And still, she does not scream. Not yet. Because what she fears is not the lack of words, but the presence of a soul sealed off like a tomb beneath the ring on your finger. You do not rage. You do not abandon. You fulfill the rituals. You come home. But she feels it, the funeral held in secret, where your desire was lowered into the ground. Coffin closed. Prayers whispered only in the night. And the worst part is this: you mean well. You say you want peace. You say you need time. But what you never say is where you went when you stopped trying to be understood. She speaks to you with trembling breath, the way someone knocks on a door they're not sure still leads anywhere. She names her pain. You nod again, but behind your gaze is an abyss that reflects without echoing. That's what she cannot forgive, not anger, not confusion, but the holy vacancy in your answers. You do not explain, do not plead, do not even flinch. Instead, you preserve yourself, like a relic, like something God once touched but no longer enters. She used to think silence was patience. Now it feels like punishment. You perform affection with a gentle precision, the plate placed on the table, the jacket held out in winter, the glance across the room. But these gestures are coffin nails when not attached to breath. She is not looking for perfection. She is begging for imperfection with a pulse. A contradiction that screams you're still alive inside this marriage. A single cracked word that says you're afraid, not gone. But your silence is too clean. She dreams of tearing it open. In the hallway, when she says you never fight back, your face tightens not in defense, but in resignation. You are not hiding something cruel. You are hiding something dead. And the way you turn your back as if you have no right to speak is the very moment she realizes this is not humility. This is exile. You have left the marriage emotionally the way the soul leaves the body in sleep, slowly, quietly, respectfully. You think you're avoiding harm by staying quiet. But silence is not the absence of violence. It is sometimes its most spiritual form, because it forces her to battle a ghost, a memory of you that still wears your skin but no longer bleeds when touched. There was a time you wrote her letters, drunk with contradictions, riddled with doubt. She kept them all not because they were romantic, but because they were real. And now, she holds a man whose every word is rehearsed in advance, every breath pre-approved by dignity. You have become your own moral performance, and your performance, though graceful, leaves no place for her grief. She doesn't want you to explain everything. She just wants you to shatter. Once, open your mouth and say something that doesn't end in quiet closure. Let her see you sweat in the mess. Let her hear your doubt like the groan of a cathedral before it collapses. Let her witness the you that even you no longer trust. But instead, you give her peace. Peace like fog on a battlefield that never happened. Peace like the kind a widowed bride receives when the body is never recovered. You ask her if she's okay. You ask her if she's tired, and then you fold back into the quiet again, like a monk in mourning. She stands there with blood still ringing in her ears, and your silence tells her it's not worth resurrecting. Do you even realize how terrifying it is to be next to someone who does not leave, but no longer arrives? She fears your stillness because it does not hold her. It merely absorbs her storm and offers nothing in return. No protest, no weeping, no righteous declaration. Just a man standing still, like a tombstone someone forgot to engrave. You do not slam the door. You walk away quietly, and that's what breaks her the quiet. You hold your pain like a sacrament you refuse to share, as if to confess it would desecrate its holiness. But in doing so, you ask her to be priest, mourner, and widow all at once, and she's drowning under the weight of interpreting your absence while you are still alive. You think you're noble, she thinks you're gone. In the late hours, when the silence thickens, she cries beside you and you touch her shoulder like someone offering last rites. And when she asks what you're thinking, you answer, nothing. Not because you are empty, but because the place where you once brought your words has been boarded up. She used to imagine growing old with you. Now she imagines how long she can survive next to someone who has already begun the process of spiritual hibernation. You're not cruel. You're vanishing. She knows the man who raged would have been dangerous, but the man who says nothing is unreachable. You do not scream, but your silence carries all the finality of an abandoned church, echoes without sermons, incense without fire. And what terrifies her is not that you no longer love her, it's that you may not even feel the need to. You may have entered that sacred coldness where needs themselves feel shameful, where even the ache to be understood becomes a weakness unworthy of your inner vow. You told her once you were afraid to be like your father, cruel, loud, dismissive. So you became his opposite, restrained, quiet, unreadable. And in doing so, you became another kind of ghost. She does not fear your father's violence. She fears your restraint because it is so polite, so moral, and so inhuman. There is no funeral for this kind of departure, no language for this kind of abandonment, just the slow realization that your silence is not waiting for the storm to pass. It is the storm, a still, divine withdrawal that renders her invisible. And what she grieves most is not the loss of your words, but the loss of your need to be known. You believe you are being strong. She believes you are being unreachable. And between those two beliefs grows a chasm wide enough to bury 1,000 wedding vows. She wears the ring still. She makes dinner still. She even kisses you goodnight. But every time she does, she wonders if she's pressing her lips to a stone that used to be a man. And she doesn't know how long she can keep loving someone who will not confess any reason to be loved. You stand at the altar of intimacy, robed not in holiness, but in hesitation. And when she speaks her wounds, you do not answer with rage or comfort. You simply listen, nodding like a priest who hears confession but offers no absolution. You do not bless, you do not condemn, you just remain tragically, impeccably silent. She fears you more than she fears anger, because anger has heat. Anger declares something sacred has been violated. But your silence is the sound of nothing mattering. You speak like a man who believes himself unworthy of opinion, or worse, above the need for one. And that's what terrifies her. You make no defense because you feel no need. You do not plead your case because you think there's nothing worth proving. You do not fight for her pain, or even your own, because in your church, all sermons have already ended. She is not screaming at a man. She is praying at a God who no longer descends. You do not need to leave her to make her feel abandoned. You only need to keep withholding your voice. It's not that you don't feel. You feel everything, but you store it like relics in a sealed glass case, admired, untouched, unspeakable. When she asks what's wrong, you look at her like a man who buried his name years ago and forgot where the tomb was placed. She does not want the perfect sentence. She wants a whisper cracked open by pain. She wants the stutter, the confession, the blasphemy, something unclean and alive. But instead, you give her quiet civility, the soft, cold snow of a man who fears becoming the monster more than he fears becoming stone. And perhaps you're right. Perhaps your silence is the last thing that keeps you safe from becoming your father, your shame, your past. But what about her? What keeps her safe from your silence? She is not asking you to preach. She is asking you to bleed. But you are too reverent, too restrained, as if speaking too soon would desecrate the gravity of her suffering. And so you wait, and wait, and wait, until the moment is gone, until her tears are dry, until the ritual of distance has performed itself again. And she begins to wonder if the truth is not that you are waiting for the right words, but that you believe there are no words that could ever redeem you. So you say nothing. You sit at the kitchen table, 2 feet away from the woman who once undressed your soul with her breath, and now you cannot even say, "I'm scared." You speak about politics, the weather, the plans for tomorrow, but nothing about the way your ribs tighten when she cries. Nothing about the strange shame you feel when you cannot fix her pain. Nothing about the shadow that whispers, "You will fail her. You already have." And yet you smile, like a priest at a funeral who knows the dead too intimately to weep. She sees it, that flicker in your eye that says you're not numb, just disciplined. And she hates you for it, not because you're cruel, but because your restraint feels like judgment, as if her emotion is indulgent, as if her grief is disorderly, as if she should know better than to try and drag God back down into the room. She begins to fear her own voice. She softens her tone. She second-guesses every word. Because your silence doesn't say "I'm listening." It says "I already decided." And in that absence, she starts to spiral, not because you rejected her, but because you offered no confirmation that there was anything left to reach for. You do not yell. You do not belittle, but you sit in that chair like a verdict. And that is the most spiritual cruelty, to be unmoved by someone who is collapsing in front of you. She tells you that it hurts when you walk away, and you say, "I didn't know," not because you are unaware, but because you convinced yourself that pain unspoken was pain unreal. You thought silence was respect, but she hears it as exile. You thought you were giving her space. She sees it as abandonment. You thought you were being good. But she wonders if goodness without presence is worse than evil with confession. You say you don't know what to say. That's not the truth. The truth is you don't believe what you would say would matter. And so you let the void speak for you. You were raised to be calm, to never panic, to never impose. And now, even in intimacy, you believe that speaking your fear would be a kind of violence. So you swallow it, and in doing so, you leave her alone in her chaos while you float above it like a saint no longer bound to the world. But what is holiness without dissent? You perform your quiet like a ritual, each breath controlled, each sentence trimmed, each expression mild, and yet beneath it, There is an entire gospel of shame screaming to be broken. You carry it like the cross your father gave you the belief that real men don't explain themselves, don't need comfort, don't let the sacred be seen in its mess. But she is not the congregation. She is the altar, and she is breaking beneath your sacred restraint. You do not pray aloud. You do not confess. You only exist, silent and sacred, beside her unraveling body. And in your stillness, she begins to fear that you have placed yourself in the position of God, a God who judges without words, forgives without touch, loves without risk. But she does not need a God. She needs a man who breaks. She wants to hear you curse, to cry, to beg, to say, I don't know what I'm doing, but I don't want to lose you. But you look at her like a priest watching a penitent who weeps too much, talks too fast, repents too wildly, and she begins to wonder if the distance between you isn't emotional, it's eternal. You nod, you listen, you wait, but you do not enter. And love that does not enter becomes its own betrayal. She starts to flinch at the sound of her own voice, not because you silenced her, but because you made her feel as though nothing she says could disturb your calm. And that's the cruelty, not your anger, not your punishment, but your serene detachment. You want to be safe, she wants to be known, and between those desires is a canyon filled with broken prayers. She is not asking you to have the answers, she is begging you to lose your poise, to let the sermon fall apart, to let the sacred silence be broken by something as mortal as confusion. But you keep giving her this temple of composed gestures, and she is starving for the man who once shattered under the weight of his own longing. She is not afraid of your silence because it is empty. She is afraid because it contains a verdict she cannot read. You think you are holy for not speaking, but sometimes silence is a sword, and she is bleeding from every place you refuse to preach. You tell yourself silence is mercy, but she feels it like a sentence already passed. When she looks into your stillness, she does not see comfort. She sees a man who has already made his decision, not through declaration, but through the sheer refusal to speak. And in that refusal, she reads something more punishing than anger, a verdict too sacred to articulate. You do not raise your hand, you do not walk away, but the way you do nothing becomes its own execution, gentle, holy, final. You believe your silence protects her from your darker instincts. She believes your silence is the darker instinct. And now, even her voice begins to betray her. She speaks too loud. She repeats herself. She clings to metaphors, memories, arguments you've already outgrown. You nod, always nodding, always calm. But beneath that calm, she feels the weight of a judgment more crushing than words you have already withdrawn. And the silence is just your slow, sacred way of confirming that she is no longer necessary to your inner world. You don't accuse her. That would be easier. That would be human. You just pause a little too long after her questions. You respond just a little too gently. You place the cup on the table with just enough care to show you've mastered detachment. And that is what she fears. Not that you hate her, but that you are past her, beyond her, still here but not reachable. Your stillness is like snow in a graveyard. It hides nothing. It only softens the shape of what has already been buried. There are nights when she screams just to feel something crack, and you let her, not with cruelty, with composure, with a heartbreaking restraint. You let her rage collapse against the stone wall of your serenity, and you think you are doing her a kindness. But what she sees is a man who no longer believes her pain is worth disturbing himself for. And so she begins to rot in the cold of your sacred quiet. You call it maturity. She calls it abandonment. Because to her, stillness is not peace. It is punishment wrapped in velvet. You do not yell. You do not blame. But you also do not bleed. And so she starts to believe the bleeding must be her fault. She asks what you want. You shrug. She asks what you feel. You hesitate. She asks if you still love her. You say of course, like a man reading from a prayer card. Like the words have meaning but no breath left in them. And her soul begins to recoil not from rejection, but from something deeper irrelevance. You make her feel like a disturbance in the temple of your inner balance. And the horror is not that you stop loving her. The horror is that you still do, but no longer want to need her. You believe in silence like others believe in God. Because silence never betrayed you. Silence never humiliated you. Silence never asked more from you than you were willing to give. But now, that same silence becomes the tool with which you erase her, one unfinished sentence at a time. She tells you she feels invisible. You say you're just trying not to make it worse, but in that effort to avoid chaos, you become the architect of emptiness. And every time you say nothing, she hears a sermon in your stillness, a sermon that preaches, "I've already judged this, and it's not worth resurrection." You mistake your calm for grace, but grace touches, grace weeps, grace enters the wound. You do none of these. Instead, you fold your arms, soften your tone, and sit in a silence that makes her want to claw through her own skin just to provoke a reaction. She begins to scream not to hurt you, but to hear her own voice in a house that has stopped echoing. And when you walk away again, slowly, silently, honorably, she knows she's not losing a man. She's losing a ghost who never told her when he died. You don't lie. You just refuse to speak from the place that bleeds. You don't avoid. You just sanctify avoidance until it looks like wisdom. You don't punish. But your indifference is so composed, so perfectly restrained, that she feels every inch of her soul being disqualified in real time. It's not the words you never said. It's the fact that you withheld all risk. You protected yourself from being seen, from being wrong, from being weak. And in doing so, you forced her to carry not only her grief, but yours as well. And she is collapsing beneath the weight of both. You call it love, but love, when stripped of expression, becomes indistinguishable from disinterest. You fear being the villain, so you become the saint. But saints do not share beds. Saints do not hold hands. Saints die alone. And she is not asking for sainthood. She is asking for presence. But your presence has become so controlled, so ritually distant, that she wonders if you love her or merely tolerate her existence because it would feel wrong to do otherwise. And that is what wounds her more than cruelty, the idea that she has become a moral obligation in a life where passion has been crucified for the sake of peace. You do not scream, you do not threaten, you do not even sigh, you simply go quiet. And that quiet becomes the loudest condemnation she's ever known. Because in that quiet is the unspoken truth you have already decided. You simply refuse to speak the sentence aloud. So she begins to fall apart in front of you, day by day, moment by moment, and you think you are honoring her by not interrupting, but in truth, you are watching her drown with your hands folded in reverence. You want to be kind, you want to be fair, but the silence that shields you from blame is the same silence that strips her of dignity. She wants to know where she stands, but you offer no ground, only air, only the weightless void of non-committal presence. And there, in that weightlessness, she disappears. You think love is stillness, but love must tremble. You think peace is the absence of pain, but real peace requires a storm to survive. You think maturity is silence, but sometimes silence is just the grown-up way to abandon someone while pretending you stayed. She used to admire your stillness. Now she fears it, because it has become a mirror, and in it, she no longer sees herself. She sees only a man who worships his own restraint more than he ever worshipped connection. And now, even when you say, "I love you," it rings hollow, not because the words are false, but because they fall from lips that would rather remain closed, and she can feel it. She can feel that you would rather retreat into silence than risk saying something that might open a door you'd rather keep sealed. But she does not want a sealed room. She wants a soul, one that bleeds, one that speaks, one that dares to be wrong in front of her. And until you can give her that, your stillness will always feel like the slow, sacred way you say goodbye. In her dream, you were standing in the snow, facing a chapel with no door. Inside, she could hear the sound of your heartbeat, steady as a metronome. But when she called your name, the snow began to fall harder. She tried to walk toward you, but her feet sank into the silence. She asked once more, "Will you speak to me?" And you turned not with cruelty, not with love, but with that same unbearable calm. And then she realized the snow wasn't falling, it was rising, and your silence wasn't waiting, it was drowning her. She woke up gasping for air, whispering to no one, "I would have forgiven anything, except being slowly erased by someone who never raised his voice."